Number 1. Whitey. Really early into my marriage, I had 2 very young children. My husband was in the military, and he very often would go out to sea for months. We lived in California for a while. My elder son was in kindergarten, and my younger son was about to start preschool. So really, for the first time since I was married, I would be spending time alone at the house. A couple months before my husband went out to sea, my sons wanted to get a cat. We looked around in the paper and found someone who had a litter of kittens that they were looking to give away. So I went to look at them. One of them was pure white, and my 2 sons absolutely loved it. So we got it. And pretty typically, I suppose, they named it Whitey. For a while, everything with the cat was just fine. He grew up pretty quickly over the summer, and was a decent-sized cat by the time my boys went back to school. I mean, I was the one who took care of him, though, but the boys did the best to try to keep him fed and watered at the very least. It was the very first day that my sons went to school that I noticed a change in the cat's demeanor. I had dropped the boys off, and when I came in the door, Whitey began growling at me. This was completely new. I went over to see if there was something wrong with him, and he hissed and clawed my arm. And he got me pretty good. Then he ran across the house, and I let him out the door. He didn't come back until later in the evening, when my children were home. He was completely his normal self at that point, so I figured that it was just a freak moment. The next day, it was more the same. This time, of course, I wasn't going to get close enough to Whitey to let him claw me, though. He made it very clear that he was prepared to do it. I began to wonder if something was really wrong with this cat. Again, it got weirder later in the day because when I brought the boys home, he turned right back into the playful, lovable cat that he had always been. For the next few weeks, I had a strange love-hate relationship with that cat. Whenever the 2 of us were alone in the house together, he would growl at me, hiss at me, and then try to claw me. But whenever my husband or my kids were in the house, he wouldn't do any of these things. I was still the one who mainly took care of him, cleaning out the litter box, doing most of the feeding and watering, but for some reason, it just seemed to me like this cat simply hated me. And that didn't make sense. When I told my husband about it, he thought I was just being crazy. He thought maybe I didn't like the cat, and was seeing things in it that couldn't possibly really exist. I stopped mentioning it to him after a while because I was tired of not being taken seriously. When finally it was time for my husband to go out to sea, he would be gone for 6 months. Normally, I look forward to these times. Being apart from each other was often very good for our marriage. And this time, however, I just kept thinking about this cat, and what things were going to be like once he left. I mean, our weird and antagonistic relationship just seemed like it was going to get worse. Things were pretty much the same as we went forward. It was about a week after my husband left when it got really bad, though. I had dropped the kids off at school, and when I returned home as usual, the cat was sitting on the couch, and immediately he began his growling and hissing routine. He stood up and did that strange back-stretching thing that cats sometimes do, and time seemed to freeze for a moment. I realized this cat was going to attack me. Right when Whitey was going to come at me, I turned and ran to the bedroom door. I got into it just in time to keep the cat out. I thought it would be over, though, then something strange happened. The cat began slamming its body against the door. This happened over and over. I was terrified, but not for why you might think. I was in no danger of a cat that size breaking down a door. But this cat was crazy, and I had no idea why he was behaving this way, or what I could do about it. At some point, I'd have to leave the room and leave the house, go get my children. But that cat would be out there, and I had no expectation that he wouldn't make it as difficult as possible for me to get out. I'm embarrassed to say that I had to climb out the bedroom window. Fortunately, I had my car keys on me. When I got back home with the kids, the cat went back to its nice around the family personality. I didn't know what to do, and the only thing I could figure was that in the morning, one of my sons would have to put the cat in their room with food and water and close the door. And every day, it would bang against the door when I was alone, but act nice around everyone else. No one ever believed me. My husband got stationed in Italy about a year later, and we couldn't take the cat with us, so We rehomed it. I'm just glad it's gone. Number 2. The encounter. I really feel that before I tell this story, I should let you know that very often people get fears due to a misconception. So I will do my best to clear those up by the end of the story. My family had a cabin out in Colorado. We very often would go out there and, when I was growing up, spend a week or two there. It was beautiful, and there was a long, mountainous ride to get there, and it was great. We owned a nice enough piece of property, and there was plenty of area for us to explore. When I was 15, we were out for a family vacation. On the second day, I went out for a little bit of a hike. I came across a devoured deer corpse that was just the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. I immediately got really worried that some sort of vicious animal was out in the woods. When I brought it up to my parents, though, they told me it was likely just a mountain lion, and not to worry about it. I guess it seemed a little odd to me to not worry about something called a mountain lion. And something that could tear a deer to pieces like that, I pretty much had to trust them, though. A few nights later, I was sleeping when I heard some new sound that woke me up. I really wasn't sure what it was, but like any idiot in a horror movie, I decided I wanted to go and check it out. I looked at my clock, and it was around 2:30 in the morning. But I was curious, so I went and grabbed a flashlight. I guess I have to admit that I'm the sort of person who really enjoys being scared. I liked watching freaky movies, and them being too scared to actually even be able to fall asleep. And that hadn't happened in a long time, so I thought a little bit of suspense would be good for me. Plus my parents had emphasized that there were no dangerous to human animals around, so I felt a bit of confidence. Walking outside, there was a light in the back, but it didn't extend very far. However, we all had flashlights to use whenever we needed them, so I took the flashlight, closed the door behind me, and started searching around back there. As I got further and further out, I did begin hearing some noise. Even to this day, I have nothing that I can really even describe it like. But I didn't think it could be anything truly dangerous. To repeat, I believed my parents that there were no dangerous animals out there. But then, a thought did occur to me to send a shiver down my spine. There may not be dangerous animals, but there could definitely be dangerous people. Yeah, it was unnerving. But it was right after that, my flashlight caught something, and it was a little flash of green. When I pulled up on the light a little bit, I at first saw a dead deer lying on the ground, and then I saw an enormous cat chowing down on that deer. The flashlight got in his eyes, and the predator looked up from its meal. I couldn't even tell you what it felt like. It was a cougar, and I had interrupted its meal. The things that my parents had told me about them not being dangerous were gone. I almost turned and ran off, back to the cabin as fast as I possibly could, and I cannot really tell you why, but for some reason, I did not. I wasn't fighting or flighting. I was just standing there, and I didn't know what to do. The words my dad had told me about mountain lions not being dangerous to humans kept going through my mind. The huge cat and I kept our eyes locked together. After what seemed like forever, the lion turned and left. Me, however, I stood there, looking at the deer for a while. I was sort of scared to run, thinking that if I did, it would have chased me. I found out later that day that may have actually happened. It was just by pure luck that I guessed it. Eventually I went back to the cabin and curled up in my bed. The fear actually left, and when it did, I began looking at the situation in a much different light. I found out that mountain lions and human interaction is actually extremely rare, and an experience like mine was something most people would never have, and I surely wouldn't have again. But don't get me wrong, I don't know how I didn't mess my pants when it was happening. Number 3. Black Kitten. Warning. Some parts of this story may be disturbing to people who find animal abuse disturbing. One thing about growing up in the country is that there was a never-ending streak of animals coming and going in my life. I remember them all for better or worse, but none of them scarred me as badly as one tiny black kitten. It showed up wrapped in a towel, carried by a friend of my stepmother. It was very young, probably not even old enough to be weaned. Her friend told her it was sick and needed someone to care for it, and I guess my stepmother thought she could. I know now that it never had a chance. Even without being sick, it was just too young and should still have been with its mother. But I was just a child then, and like every other animal that crossed my path, I fell in love with it. I can't even recall now if I had time to name it. Before long, it was too sick to stand, and my stepmother told me to take it out and put it in one of the cages in the chicken coop. As I said, we lived in the country, and a coop or a barn wasn't at all an odd thing to have. We had both, though we didn't keep livestock. My stepmother told me that keeping the kitten in the coop would allow it to get fresh air. It would also keep it from infecting any of our other cats. What she didn't say was that she was tired of fooling with it, and just wanted it out of her sight. So although I didn't want to, and though it was already summer, and the days extremely hot, and though I couldn't understand at all how it was supposed to help the kitten, I took it out to the chicken coop, and I put it in one of the cages. I brought it food and water, though it neither ate nor drank, and after a few days, I walked into the coop to find the tiny kitten had passed away. I was heartbroken, but I was also scared. I never dealt with the death of a pet before, and somehow I felt like the kitten was angry with me and would want revenge. I'm sure I told my parents that it had died, but no one bothered taking the poor thing out of the coop and burying it. Days passed. I don't know how long. To a kid, it seemed like months, but it could have been less than a week. No one had bothered to bury the kitten, and finally I made myself go back to the coop. Maybe if I buried it, it would forgive me. I walked back to the coop, and I didn't even have to open the tattered old door to smell the horrid stench of death. I pulled my shirt collar up to cover my nose and mouth and held it there, opening the door. The heat in the coop was unbearable, as was the stench, and I could hear flies buzzing on the other end of the stand of cages. The end where that kitten was lying. The floor creaked as I stepped closer to that end of the coop. Images flashed through my head of the dead cat from Pet Cemetery. All fangs and claws. The dead kitten out for revenge because I had failed to save it and worse, failed to bury it. The closer I stepped to the final cage, the more I wanted to turn and run, to leave this stuffy stench-filled chicken coop and forget this ever happened. But I couldn't do it. The kitten deserved more than that, so I moved forward. The first thing I noticed as I reached the cage were the flies buzzing through the shafts of light coming through the only window, and then I realized that there were more of them. So many more of them in the cage itself. Finally, my eyes rested on the contents of the cage. It was as though the kitten had melted. There was no shape to it, just fur and flies and stench. It had died, with its head resting on the trough where I was putting its food, and now it seemed like a pile of fur that was dripping from the trough onto the floor of the cage. I never saw its eyes. I don't know if it still had them. I turned and ran from that coop and never set foot in it again from that day until the day we moved. But it wasn't over. My parents, being the assholes that they were, made my brother bury the kitten. They buried it in the backyard, so that every time I went out to play, I thought that this kitten would rise from the grave and finally get revenge on me for letting it die in that horrible, hot cage. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I posted on the community tab, but if you don't read that or follow me on Twitter, you might not know that my ex-fiancé broke into my house and attacked me on Saturday. I wasn't hurt other than a little bloody nose. but the event itself was emotionally overwhelming. However, the support I've gotten from my fellow narrators and from the best subscribers in the world has been really great, so I want to thank you all. I'm doing okay now, and I have a lot of perspective. I'm not really upset or anything. I'm just trying to decide what I want to do to move forward. I've been in Tennessee for a while, and a large part of me simply wants to go back home to Chicago. My fiancée was one of the reasons I had been sticking around, but this is all just thought. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to use the subscribe button below and the bell, or use the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please mail it to the address in the description. Also, leave me a comment and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. But whatever you do, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.